Dead on Your Feet, Arthur Grant Michaels, St. Martin's Press, New York, 1993. Stan Kraychik Mystery, Book 3, narrator Eric Aust. In memory of Tajana and Andre, with gratitude and respect and love, thanks to the patience and generosity of my friends. Chapter 8, Dancing for Daddy. I caught up with Scott Malloy and walked alongside him. "Can I buy you a cup of coffee?" I asked. "I don't drink coffee," he said with a scowl that looked alien on his creamy-skinned young face. I sensed his pace quicken. "Tea, then?" I offered. "Milk, punch, whiskey, whatever." He stopped abruptly and faced me. "What do you want from me?" he said. My eyes drank up the sight of his compact, muscular body, enhanced by the snug jeans and the loose-fitting shirt. Once again, I couldn't help noticing how basically similar were our body types, though we hardly matched in any specific measurement. Did Rafik perceive that essential likeness as well? "You knew Max Hartley," I said after a few seconds. "So did a lot of people. But I'm trying to help," he sneered. "Help who?" "Why don't you mind your own business?" I felt no urge to correct his grammar, having abandoned my mission to teach the proper use of case to the huddled, muddled masses. What intrigued me was the young dancer's portrayal of the world's first angry man. I presumed that his hostility, like most, was driven by fear, but fear of what? Me? Gay men in general? Or was it something deeper? Fear of discovery? If I was going to get him to talk to me, I'd have to show him more empathy. "I watched you in rehearsal," I said. "I really admire your dancing." He narrowed his eyes in a tough defensive squint. "I don't need your opinion of my dancing." "But I mean it," I continued. "Whether or not you like me, I like the way you move." That seemed to disarm him a bit. "And so does Rafik," I added, even though he'd never said it. "Really?" replied Scott Malloy. "Isn't it obvious? You're featured in his new work." I could see that my words were creating hairline fractures in his resistance to me. The mean squint was already relaxing, a sure sign that he wanted to be receptive, that despite his antagonism, he wanted to hear me talk about him. He said, "Rafik never tells me what he thinks." "That's his way," I replied, "but he respects you a lot, and I ought to know." The unctuous lies felt like drool on my lips, and I had the urge to wipe my mouth. Then, as though confessing something, Scott Malloy admitted quietly, "Rafik is hard to work for." I concurred with a warm and understanding look. "Nothing less than perfection for him." Scott attempted a small smile. "It must be really hard for you, too." Then, as if to clarify, he added awkwardly, "I mean, being with him and all." His voice trailed off. "He is a constant challenge," I said. This time I wasn't lying. Scott said, "Are you still offering that coffee?" His cool detachment failed to conceal his eagerness to hear any other accolades I might bestow or else invent. "Sure," I said, trying to hide my small sense of victory at winning him over for the time being. We strolled to an outdoor cafe around the corner from the studios and took a table under a big, colorful umbrella. You'd think with the arrival of warm weather, we Boston natives would be eager to sit in the sun, but Scott and I, both better being fair-skinned, opted for the protective shade. I ordered a double espresso, and Scott took steamed milk, flavored with almond syrup. "When did you start dancing?" I asked, further pursuing his trust by asking about his career. Dancers, like most performers, love to talk about their favorite subject, themselves. Scott Malloy tried another self-effacing smile and failed again, but he deserved an A for effort. Then he looked outward as though into the far distance and began the story of how I became a dancer. "I was 12, he said, but my life was already a mess. My father was gone. My mother worked 2 jobs. I was pretty independent, but I had a lot of time to kill, and I didn't mix with the other kids." He glanced across the table at me with sincere eyes. "I had a girlfriend, though," he added. "She used to take ballet lessons, and one day she invited me to go along with her, so I did, and that's when everything changed." Meaning, I know this sounds weird, but I knew from the second I went into that ballet school that I wanted to spend all my time there. My girlfriend's teacher must have seen it too, because she told me right off that I could take lessons for free. On the house, she said. I was back there the next day. And the rest is history, I added. Our beverages arrived and Scott went on. The ballet studio was like another home, a place where I could play, make believe, and do beautiful things and not be called a sissy. He feigned another innocent smile. And I could hang around with girls too. Not to mention that the training did for your body. His smile grew to an open grin. It did turn out pretty well, didn't it? He said, finally brandishing his immodesty outright. Funny thing is, he went on, I discovered a lot of the girls were tough, not soft, the way I thought dancers would be. And then I liked them even more. And what fabulous role models for a closet case. I'd heard similar accounts of a dancer's beginnings from friends of mine. Of all the artistic disciplines, dance seemed to attract the highest number of social outcasts. Maybe it's the group aspect of dance class that appeals to those sensitive, lonely souls. Dance is usually learned with other people around, which creates a kind of community, a surrogate family that continues to function in spite of a tragedy in its midst. Father died yesterday, rehearsal today at noon. So you're happy, I said, not quite sure what I meant. Scott answered, I guess so. I wouldn't mind having more exposure, bigger roles. Max kept me pretty limited. He paused and said, I guess I shouldn't talk that way about him. Death doesn't make anyone better or worse than they were alive, said pontifically Stanley. At least I have that big part in Rafik's ballet, and that's a sure thing now. He paused again, and this time his face flushed with color. He took a deep breath and recollected himself. Well, he said, it sure beats selling ties at Feline's. He chuckled. I never did that, though. Dancing is all I've ever done. I don't know what I'd do if I had to stop. For all its human interest, Scott Malloy's autobiography sounded like a prearranged script, a sad story that he dreamed up long ago to be recited on suitable occasions, and it was also a socially acceptable shield to hide behind. But I had the feeling that Scott Malloy was using that shield as a decoy to distract me while he subtly turned the table so that he could study me. For his sincere efforts at direct eye contact, I found his glance always darting about me as though he was taking a geological survey of my body's terrain. Here I had intended to find out about him, and instead I found myself feeling scrutinized, self-consciously. I rotated my cup on the tabletop. Using my thumbs and middle fingers, Scott Malloy proved my suspicions that by analyzing the gesture and then mimicking it exactly as though he was in rehearsal, practicing how to be me. I asked him directly, Who do you think killed Max Harkey? The young dancer bristled. Is that what this is about? Not me or my dancing, but Max? I nodded. I told you that right off. He made a sour face. Max Harkey forevermore, he said. Maybe you feel more for him than you're admitting. Scott laughed, guffawed at my remark. If you want the faggot, go after Marshall Xander. He's the one who chased Max around the world all his life. I wasn't even born when they met. That doesn't preclude you from the chase. He gave his mug of steamed milk a sudden and violent shove and spilled some onto the tabletop. He wiped it up with his napkin, then said, I know how I feel about Max Harkey or any other man. I don't know where you got the idea that I'm gay, but you shouldn't believe everything people tell you, including you. Look, I don't know who killed Max, but if you're looking for motives, maybe you ought to talk to Elisa. Isn't she your partner? He grimaced. She's my partner, all right, but on stage only. She saved the rest for Max. With my questioning eyes, I encouraged him to continue. He smiled cynically. She was his mistress. Don't tell me you didn't know. She snared him as soon as she arrived here. The golden-haired nymphite from Southern California. You sound like a jilted suitor. Scott Malloy thrust his jaw forward. I know it's hard for you to believe, but some men really prefer women. I ignored his taunt and pressed him further. Do you think Elisa was involved with the killing? At first, Scott appeared to shrug my question off as if he wanted to do the right thing and not implicate Elisa Cortland, but his urge to acquit himself went out. He leaned forward to his chair and put his forearms up on the edge of the coffee table. He spoke in a whisper like a secret sharer. Elisa's a devouring bitch. She takes all her strength from the people around her. That condemnation didn't exactly fit the young woman Scott Malloy had giggled and flirted with the night of Max Harkey's dinner. He went on. When we're working together, she pulls all the energy out of me. She makes it hard to dance. Sometimes I think being straight means being attracted to someone like Elisa, and then being used up and dropped. It was odd to hear him tallying his sexual drives with cool logic. He continued, sometimes I wonder if straight men should have sex with other men just to keep their masculinity. He lingered on the word and relished it. I mean, he said, every time I have sex with a woman, I feel like I identify with her a little bit. I wonder what she's expecting with me. That it's like what it's like to have a man inside you, and as long as that happens, there'll always be a part of me that's exactly like the woman I'm with, but with a man, it would always be 100% male. The young dancer's words recalled my own obsessive concern with Rafik's bisexuality. Then again, Scott Malloy's perverse theory appealed to the part of me that has always been more intrigued with why people do things rather than what they actually do. You sound unsure of yourself, I offered. Oh, I'm sure, he said quickly. It's women for me all the way. I just think about it sometimes, what it might be like with a man. My place in the realm of sexuality was obviously with male-male connections, and I found myself relieved that whatever sexual frustration I might have endured before meeting Rafik, at least I had never cowered behind a facade of heterosexuality while wondering about the alternatives. But recent rejection had turned Scott Malloy against the woman he claims to have wanted. It hadn't been enough, though, for him to base their relationship on complementary ballet techniques and body lines. He'd had to prove himself by possessing her sexually, and he'd failed. I wondered how much of his anger was strictly the result of losing Elisa Cortland to Max Harkey, and how much might have come from his blindness, purposeful or not, to his own suppressed urges. And the pisser is, he continued, the only reason Elisa seduced Max in the first place was for her career. I know she hated him. Terms from my old Freudian primer flew through my mind. Repression, projection, transference. I checked my wristwatch. Thanks a lot, I said. You've been really helpful. Don't you want to hear any more? He asked, as crestfallen as if his shriek had announced that the time was up. I'd love to, but I have to go back to work. It was the second time that morning I told him the truth. Fortified with caffeine, sugar, and prospective leads, I got up from the table and headed back to Steps. As I sat out, I realized I was only a few blocks away from Station D, police headquarters. I recalled that Lieutenant Branco had wanted to talk to me, and though he'd asked me to call first, I decided to drop in unannounced. Branco's police home used to be a smaller station, deep in the south end, but that granite structure, small and perfect, became one of the city's crown jewels of gentrification. It had been so lovely and authentically renovated that it was promptly named a historic landmark and appropriated for police administration only, the way it could contain its new cleanliness. There'd be no more criminals with their dirt and their bugs traversing the hollowed halls of Old Station E. At headquarters, luck was with me, or so I thought. Branco was not only there, but free. I pushed against the heavy oak door with the frosted glass panel that bore his name. His office was small and compulsively neat. He greeted me with a question. Things all right at home? So far, I answered. That's good. Sit down. Coffee? Though the recent espresso doppio was already sending gigavolts of energy through my nervous system and causing the kind of high-tension cerebral activity that distorts even a great artist's eye-to-hand coordination, the kind of hyper-energy that can turn a client's request for a light shaping into a total restyle, the likes of which are really rarely seen outside a prison camp. Despite the kind of rush, I could hardly refuse Branco's typical hospitality. Sure, I said. Then, hoping to buffer my stomach from the onslaught of another dose of caffeine, I asked, Do you have cream? You'll have to take it straight, said the cop as he filled a paper cup with brown sludge and handed it to me. No delicately roasted and cautiously brewed Arabic for that guy. This stuff had come from a supermarket can and had cooked and reduced for at least an hour on the hot plate. I've been thinking, said Branco. I know we don't see eye to eye on very much. I swirled the paper cup as if to cool down the steaming muck inside. I had no desire to taste it. But this time I'm not going to fence you in, he said. When did you ever, Lieutenant? He cocked his head slightly. In the past, I avoided you to keep out of these things. Not that you ever listened to me. I bobbed my head and shoulders slightly as though I was enjoying some cool Latin music audible only to me. But this time I'm going to give you the go-ahead. You can meddle away to your heart's content. Did I ever need your permission? Not really. I just wanted to tell you where I stand. Is that what you wanted to talk to me about? Branco nodded, and I didn't trust him for a second. Why? I said. Isn't it obvious? The Latin rhythm in my head was changing to something more percussive, more like the sacrificial drums from the Rite of Spring. Branco continued, in the past you've always taken an opposing stance to mine, and in spite of whatever happened between us, it never hurt the final outcome of the case. Lieutenant, are you asking for my help? Absolutely not, but I'm not putting any limits on you either. Reflexively, I raised the paper cup to my mouth and let the murky liquid touch my lips. It was bitter and burnt, but strangely not loathsome. I caught Branco watching my reaction. It's not as good as yours, he said. You're right, I replied with a smirk, and since we're being so buddy-buddy today, can I ask you something? Branco wavered for an instant as if fearing what secret I might dare to know, but he quickly regained his cool machismo. What? He said, braving my impending query with manly composure. Can I see your file on Tony Di Natale? Palpable relief showed on the comp's face. Officially, no, but I can tell you what's in it. Shoot then, I said. Branco twisted his big, sensuous mouth into a smile. You do like to provoke me, Kraychik. Don't flatter yourself, Lieutenant. I do it to my cat, too. The virile Italian frowned, obviously displeased at being conjoined with other household pets. So, I said, what's your take on Tony Di Natale? Care to tell me why you're so interested? I'm trying to settle a domestic score. Branco pulled one corner of his mouth up into a wry smile. Then he leaned back in his chair, put his hands behind his head, and stretched his torso luxuriously, like a big, contented tiger about to engage in a playful bout of get the gazelle. We suspect that Miss Di Natale committed the crime to protect herself from defamation. By who? Branco smiled. We figure that Max Harkey was in love with her, but she was involved with someone else. Possibly even your friend. You think she killed Max Harkey because he was in love with her, but she's really after Rafik? Branco held up one of his big hands. Do you want to hear this or not? Sorry, I said sorry. I shrank back dutifully, but I did recall Tony Di Natale's open flirtation with Rafik the night of the dinner. Yet Max Harkey had appeared unmoved by it. Had that been good acting on his part, or had he truly not cared? Branco went on. A man like Max Harkey couldn't accept that kind of humiliation. He'd take revenge, so he planned to cancel her contract with the ballet company. An extremely lucrative contract, and also to defame her throughout the arts world so that she'd probably never work again. I felt as though Branco should have finished with a question to me. What's wrong with this theory? Lieutenant, first off, Max Harkey was incapable of being humiliated. He was the kind of person who used people up and then discarded them. It was very simple with him. Sometimes those big, important people can be pretty fragile underneath. Sometimes, yes, but from what I know of Max Harkey, there was nothing about him that was fragile. Least of all his ego, and beyond that, from what little I know of Tony Di Natale, she's too smart to kill somebody over money. What else could she do? Asked Branco. She'd work it out another way, maybe seduce Max Harkey into some kind of amiable settlement. But she wouldn't kill the guy. How do you know that? I almost told him, because Rafik says so, but figured that wouldn't convince Branco. Instead, I said, I guess because she's an artiste. An artiste just wouldn't do a thing like that. When Rafik had expressed that very idea to me, I had denied it as nonsense. Now here, I was spouting it up. Branco, who sat there silent as stone. If it's possible, I said, I'd like to see her. That's no problem, he said. You'll arrange it then. No need to. We released her half an hour ago. You what? Branco's mouth spread open to a full grin. She's out, he said. Free as the breeze. But you were holding her for murder. Who paid the bail? No bail, he replied. We were holding her for questioning. We didn't have sufficient grounds for a charge. Not yet. You led me on. I told you the facts as I know them. You inferred what you wanted. Do you know where she is? You know that better than me. Damn his wrong usage. I relinquished my cup of coffee to Branco's desktop. It was still full, though now tepid, with an oily rainbow-hued slick forming on its surface. I stood up. I guess that puts things between us back the way they've always been. That may change soon, he said enigmatically. When I left his office, one question persisted. Why had Branco been so friendly, yet so deceitful? I telephoned Nicole at the shop and explained that I was on my way back there. When I told her I'd seen Branco, she said brightly, Oh, how is he today? Odd, I replied before pondering the very oddness of her question. That's good, she said. Then, as is Nicole's wont, she hung up without saying goodbye. I hope someday to uncover the root of that strange habit, but for now, the question persisted. Why hadn't she scolded me for my truancy? I was returning to Snips along the same route. I'd come, and once again I passed by the outdoor cafe near the ballet company studios. I was surprised to see Scott Malloy still sitting at the table where we'd spoken, but now Elisa Cortland was with him. They appeared trapped and miserable in each other's company. Scott happened to catch sight of me approaching them. Within seconds he stood up and fled from the table. Not a subtle exit. When I got there, I asked Elisa Cortland if I could join her. Suit yourself, she said, hiding behind a huge opaque sunglasses and a wide-brimmed hat of starched linen. Her blonde hair was mostly tucked up underneath the hat, but from what I could see, the rare and uniform platinum hue was all natural. Scott was telling me what you've been up to, she said. So why don't I save you the bother of asking questions and just tell you my side of everything? Thanks, I said, but I knew the easy corporation like hers was not to be trusted. A waiter appeared at our table. Elisa ordered another, and the waiter dutifully verified her Café Borgia. After my earlier dose of caffeine, a glass of lemonade would have been a wise choice, but it might have cast me as a delicate creature, oversensitive to legal drugs. So I ordered a real man's drink, another double espresso. When Elisa Cortland lit a cigarette and, like the best of storytellers, began her tale in Medias Res, I was Max Harkey's mistress, but it didn't last long. What ended? What usually does another person? Tony Di Natale? So it would seem, she said. Were you hurt? I wasn't in it for love. Then were you angry? She allowed a tiny smile, but her eyes were concealed by the dark lenses of her sunglasses. I was hoping, she said, for something from his estate, some appreciation for services rendered, if nothing else. What about the way he treated you as a dancer? What about it? I was a vehicle for his creative whims. That's all we ever were. The audience sees a ballerina as a fairy tale figure, a princess from an enchanted world, but really, we're nothing more than neurotic, emaciated athletes, contortionists, actually, who jump and spin and perform circus tricks on our toes. Is it like that with Rafik, too? Another smile, more playful this time, but no reply. Her coffee arrived. Her Café Borgia was extravagant, with the scent of orange liqueur and bitter chocolate, capped with a layer of creme fraiche. My espresso was straight, uncut, and aromatic, as I said earlier, a manly drink. I said, You make dancing sound horribly grim. She took a sip of her coffee, then, demure as a damsel, blotted a hairline of cream from her lip with a gauzy handkerchief. I'd bet she'd rehearsed that gesture a lot. The illusion of glamour is worth all the pain, she said. What about your relationship to Scott Malloy? He deserves a gold medal for most earnest closet case in the ballet world. She waited for my reaction, which I held in check. Two could play the game of cool. She went on. After years of Scott trying to get Max's attention, I arrived in town, and Max took me as his mistress at once. all hell broke loose with Scott. He accused Max of treating him unfairly, and he did it in front of the other dancers, right there in class. How did they react? Elisa shrugged. Ballet isn't democratic. Everyone else knew enough to keep quiet. But Scott went on, even threatening Max if he wouldn't start treating his dancers equally. It was shocking. I think most of all for Max, he never suspected that Scott had any feelings for anyone, least of all for him, and suddenly Scott was threatening to hurt Max unless he loved him back. Was it that blatant? Did Scott really demand that Max Herky love him? Oh, of course not. She sipped at her coffee and then said, "You're almost as sappy as he is." You don't much like Scott, do you? He's silly. He has no goals for his life. He wanted Max to be his father. I find that mildly disgusting. I think it's better to be independent of everybody, including father figures. They're useful for getting started, but it's better to learn to get ahead without them. If you dislike Scott so much, why do you stay friendly with him? She turned her head as though she wanted me to admire her profile instead of asking stupid questions. She was beautiful. Scott helps me keep my own weaknesses in check, like a barometer for character flaws. She turned her face back to me. Are you surprised that I can admit I'm not perfect? Well, I don't delude myself about anything, including my shortcomings. Scott is a mirror that tells me when I'm thinking or behaving in a weak way. Elisa Cortland portrayed emotional honesty so well it was almost convincing. No wonder the critics loved her, but I took her cool logic one step further and realized that she had a vested interest in keeping Scott Malloy in her power, in sustaining his heterosexual delusions. Through him, she could artificially enhance her own strength. Scott had admitted to me that as a dancing partner, Elisa drained the energy from him like a succubus. Doesn't anything affect you? I asked, unable to control the tinge of moralism in my voice. As if on cue, she removed her sunglasses. I got my fill of my warm and fuzzy feel-good stuff from my family. Everything they do, everything they stand for, environment, health, love of mankind, all the new age cliches, it's all crap. There's nothing before or after this, it's all now, and I want big helpings of everything. That's why I left the tyranny of California. Ask for the world and end up in Boston, Massachusetts. However different the circumstances, Elisa Cortland's escape from tyranny very much resembles Scott Malloy's. I gulped the rest of my espresso and stood up. I've got to get back to work, I said. Maybe we can continue this another time. As Scott Malloy had done earlier, Elisa Cortland looked astonished that I could end our open, hearted discussion about art and life and love and her so lightly for something so mundane as my job. A Gay Mysteries audiobooks. I think it is easy to hate a label, but a face humanizes the word. So this effort is twofold. To offer comfort to those like myself that your world didn't end because you don't fit into the view of acceptable society on both sides. And in hopes of helping those with family that are LGBTQ, that it doesn't mean we are aliens from the child they once knew. Reassure them so they can maybe be supportive at the same time, being true to their values.